Do you see my PowerPoint I'm sharing with you? Abdul Qadir, you have problems because others already see it. So make sure your connections are right. Yeah, here you too. Check your connections, please. All right, let's continue what we started the other session in terms of clarifying the definition of discourse analysis. I tried to present you different definitions of discourse analysis from multiple perspectives, and I also offered a number of examples to show you what we mean by what we say, that what we say is not always it does not always equal to what we mean, and what we mean might be more than what we say, and that is the concern of discourse analysis. Today I'm going to continue that topic, going on to more specific concerns of discourse analysis, drawing a fine line between discourse analysis and pragmatics. All right, let me just record it. So today I'm going to continue defining discourse analysis and in fact drawing a fine line between discourse and pragmatics, because often we assume discourse and pragmatics have equal concerns, and that's why we sometimes use the two terms interchangeably. Looking at these two areas from more specific technical perspectives, discourse and pragmatics have different orientations. So in discourse analysis we have two general perspectives, or two different schools, let us say. The British view of discourse analysis and the American view of discourse analysis. British view of discourse analysis is greatly influenced by the work of Michael Halliday and his systemic functional grammar, or systemic functional linguistics. Systemic functional grammar has intimate connections with the Prague School of linguistics. Halliday's systemic functional grammar emphasizes the social functions of language and thematic structuring, informational structures. Also important in the formation of British discourse analysis is the work by Sinclair and Coulthard and their project in schools. working on teacher-pupil talk and the language that is exchanged between teachers and students in school context at Birmingham University. So the model that they have developed, in fact, is a description of teacher-student talk based on a hierarchy of discourse units. Other similar attempts have dealt with doctor-patient relationship, like teacher-student relationship, doctor-patient relationships, or service encounters, mm, where clients and owners interact, or interviews, debates, business negotiations, so on. So the British work has followed structural linguistics on the basis of the isolation of units and sets of rules defining well-formed sequences in discourse. American view of discourse analysis has been dominated by the work of people who advocate ethno-methodological traditions, which emphasizes the research method of close observation of groups of people communicating in natural settings. Ethno-methodology emphasizes types of events such as storytelling, greeting, greeting rituals, verbal encounters or verbal duels in different cultural and social settings. In conversation analysis, the emphasis is not upon building structural models like the British view of discourse analysis, but on the close observation of the behavior of participants in talk and interactions. People like Shigloff, Jefferson, Sachs, Goffman, Grafenko, these people have contributed a lot to the development of American view of discourse analysis. Also, people like Van Dyke, Bogrand, and Halliday, who are considered to be text grammarians within the world of written discourse, have contributed to the development of American view of discourse analysis. So they see text as language elements strung together in relationships with one another. So these people have made significant impact in this area. So whatever I have said up to now in relation to discourse analysis is that discourse analysis deals with language beyond words, clauses, phrases, sentences, right? That is needed. It is that part of language that deals with above sentence level for successful communication. It looks at patterns of language across texts. It considers the relationship between language and the social and cultural context in which it is used. Discourse analysis considers the ways that the use of language presents different views of the world, different understandings. It examines how the use of language is influenced by participants, by relationships between participants, as well as the effects of the use of language upon social identities and social relations. Well, the term discourse analysis was first introduced by Zelig Harris in 1952 as a way of analyzing connected speech and writing. Harris had two main interests. One was the examination of language beyond the sentence level, and one was the relation between linguistic and non-linguistic behaviors. But what do we mean when we say beyond the sentence level? By beyond the sentence level, we mean that the relation between information embedded in language and information that is embedded in the context in which that language is used. If I say, that the runway is full at the moment, this can take different meanings depending on who says this, in what context, where, and when, under what circumstances. It also partly depends on the relationships between the person who says this and the person who receives this. Right. So if this is said by a pilot, or if this is said by the air traffic controller to the pilot, that can have one meaning. But if this is said by a friend boarding the plane to a friend who is waiting for him at the airport, then that can take another meaning. So imagine this is said by an air traffic controller to a pilot. What does that mean? If this is said by an air traffic controller to a pilot, what does that mean? Yes, that the airport is full of planes and and you cannot land. And you cannot land now. So the air traffic controller is telling the pilot to fly over the airport for some time before he is given the permission to land. Right? This is the meaning that might be in fact communicated if the air traffic control. Now imagine this is said by someone who is boarding by a traveler, by a passenger who is boarding this plane and talking to another friend who is waiting for him at the airport to pick him up. What would that mean? No. Now, if this is said by somebody who is boarding, by a passenger who is boarding the plane to another friend who is waiting for him at the airport to pick him up, then that might mean, well, an apology for being late. An apology for being late, or an excuse for being late, that the airplane cannot land because the runway is full at the moment. So the airplane cannot land, and this is an excuse for being late, right? So the same utterance can take different meanings when in different contexts with different participants involved. So discourse analysis offers a deeper understanding and appreciation of texts and how they become meaningful to their users. Discourse analysts are also interested in how people organize what they say in the sense of what they typically say first and what they say next, and so on in a conversational piece of writing. So we're interested in organizing our text in what we say first, what we say next, and how we arrange our discourse. This is something which varies across languages and cultures. So if you write an email in Arabic addressing a fellow countryman, or if you're writing an email in English addressing me, or if you're writing an email addressing American, most probably your email structures would be different. The structure of an email when you address a fellow countryman, or the structure of this email when you address me, would be different because you write in different languages. So you try to shape your email in a way that is characteristic of English, or that is characteristic of Arabic. This is true. I was once in Basra about a year ago or so, just a few days before this COVID-19 began to spread out. And I noticed that people in Basra greet in Arabic uh, differently, and their greetings are different from the Arabs in Ahwaz, for instance. They use language in their greetings and even in their partings that make it different from the type of greetings going on between Arabs in Ahwaz. I do not remember well exactly the language that you use when you greet or when you part, but I could easily recognize though I do not know much Arabic, but still I could recognize the difference between the way that you part, the way that you, well, say goodbye, and the way that Arabs in Ahwas, well, say goodbye. And that was interesting to me. Yes, yes. What is the question? في أمان الله. Now this is also mentioned by the Arabs in Ahwas. But there was an expression that I only heard from people in Basra, not from the Arabs in Ahwas. Salam. Wada'a Allah. Well, Wada'a Allah. Well, probably this is an expression that you do not hear from people in Ahwas. The text can be written or also shown. All right. Well, some of these expressions, Assalamu alaikum, no, I think these are quite common. Well, one useful way of looking at language is in social and cultural context. For instance, what is said to whom this is said, where and when that is said, and under what circumstances. This is called the ethnography of communication, as Himes says. Ethnography of communication. For example, how I buy something in England, or how I buy something in Ahwaz, or how you buy something in Basra. Well, this might be different. I mean, the way that we buy it. For instance, in Ahwaz, we have learned to well bargain over the price, to haggle over the price. Why? Because if you do not bargain over the price, then you might buy it more than it is worth, right? So you might be overcharged. So you try to get a discount by haggling over the price. Or in England, if you buy something, then the shop owner thanks you for buying it, for buying from his or her shop. Right? So in hours, this might be said. I mean, the shop owner might thank you for buying from his shop, or he might not do that. But in England, if you buy something from a shop, then they thank you for buying. So these are acts that are characteristic of one context rather than another context. I don't know whether in Basra you also have the habit of bargaining over the price. Right, so you also do it because you believe that if you bargain the price, then you get a discount. I have been to Malaysia, for instance. In Malaysia, they do not bargain over the price. In Europe, you never bargain over the price. Prices are fixed, and you rely on those price labels. Well, discourse analysis also deals with communicative competence. What do we mean by communicative competence? Well, in fact, communicative competence is background of ethnography of communication. Communicative competence is more than linguistic competence, is more than your knowledge of language. When we say, yes, I see, you also bargain. So when we say somebody is communicatively competent, we mean he knows language and he knows how he uses language in relation to the context in which that language is used. So your knowledge of of communication is more than your knowledge of language. In fact, your knowledge of language is part of your communicative ability. In addition to your knowledge of language, you also have knowledge of appropriacy. That is, you know what is appropriate in what context. So part of your communicative competence is your knowledge of communicative appropriacy or social appropriacy. Part of your communicative competence is your ability to process language psycholinguistically. We know that our brain has a limited capacity to hold information. And part of your communicative competence is your knowledge of what is true in language and what is untrue, what is actually said in one language and what is not said. In English, for instance, we usually say, how old are you? We don't say, how young are you? You see, or we say, how much do you weigh? We don't say, how little do you weigh? Right? So the question is, will questions look the same? But still you go for one rather than another. You don't say how little do you weigh. You say how much do you weigh, right? You don't say how young are you. You say how old are you. So the unmarked or usual way of saying it to say it like that. Right. Another characteristic of discourse analysis is your awareness of discursive competence, your knowledge of discursive competence. This is the term that was coined by Bhatia in 2004. Discursive competence, in fact, draws together the notion of textual competence, generic competence, and social competence. But what is textual competence? By textual competence, we mean your ability to produce and interpret contextually appropriate texts. And to do this, we draw on textual, contextual, and pragmatic knowledge. So by textual competence, we mean the ability to produce and interpret contextually appropriate texts. What about generic competence? Well, generic competence, in fact, describes how we are able to respond to recurring and new situations by constructing, interpreting, exploiting conventions associated with the use of particular kinds of text. So generic competence deals with how we react to recurring situations. How we greet each other in different contexts, in different but similar contexts. How we part, how we continue a topic, well, in different contexts. How we, respond to an invitation, for instance, in different contexts. And social competence, social competence describes how we use language to take part in social and institutional interactions in a way that enables us to express our social identity. So discursive competence draws together these three: textual, generic, and social competence. What am I talking about? I am talking about discourse analysis. Now, differences between spoken and written discourse. Often we believe that spoken and written discourses are very different, And this is partly true. They are very different. Mm, they are different in terms of grammatical intricacies, lexical density, nominalization, explicitness, contextualization, spontaneity, repetition, hesitation, and redundancy. Well, in terms of grammatical intricacy, you might say that you might believe that written discourse is more intricate, more complex in terms of grammar and structure. But I should say that the spoken discourse has also its own intricacies and complexities. So there are certain patterns that are characteristic of spoken discourse, like when you, for instance, in a spoken discourse, you know that we speak very fast, and so we leave a lot of things unsaid. We combine uh, clauses, we reduce these clauses, and so these clauses run into one another, making it very difficult to follow if you're not part of that context. In written discourse, you have complex patterns. Two or three clauses run into one another, complex constructions. So, spoken discourse, written discourse have got their own intricacies and complexities. In terms of lexical density, well, I should say is written discourse is lexically more dense than spoken discourse. Uh, in written discourse, we rely, especially in academic discourse, we rely on Latin and Greek words. In spoken discourse, we very much rely on English words, on small words, but in written discourse, we tend to rely on longer words and expressions. Lexically, written discourse is more dense, more complex. Written discourse is characterized by nominalization, especially academic discourse is characterized by nominalization. And in fact, there is a high level of nominalization in written discourse. By nominalization, we mean when actions and events are turned into nouns. So instead of using actions and events, we use nouns. This is called, Halliday calls, grammatical metaphor. And one example of grammatical metaphor is nominalization. Well, another difference between written and spoken discourses is explicitness. Well, explicitness, I should say that written discourse is more explicit than spoken discourse. Why? Because you cannot run after your writing to clarify what you have said. In speaking, you might rely very much on the context and contextual information. So where you feel the information that you have provided is not adequate, the information in the context is out there to help you complement what you have not said, or complement what you have said. In a spoken discourse, you are available, you are present, and so what you say is added to what is available in the context. What is said is added to what is available in the context to communicate all the meaning. In writing, this is not so, and your writing should be informative enough, so you use more language to clarify what you say. Another difference between writing and speaking is contextualization. Oh, I forgot to talk about explicitness. Well, a commonly held view is that writing is more explicit. This depends on the purpose of the text and is not absolute. Sometimes speaking is also explicit. Sometimes you say something in speaking, I mean, sometimes you say something very directly. Or in writing you use direct language, and sometimes you use indirect language to address the reader or to address the listener. So this is relative. Explicitness in writing or speaking is relative, and it depends on the context in which you use it. About contextualization, well, speaking is very highly contextualized because what you say is tied to the context in which it is used, to the extent that if you remove it from the context, it might become meaningless. Writing is more decontextualized because you write in such a way that, well, the addressee, the reader, would be able to work out the meaning. So in speaking, our speech is contextualized. It is highly dependent on the context in which it is used. In writing, it is decontextualized because you, in fact, call on your listeners, call on your readers in writing, and you call on your readers to, well, elicit all the meaning without recourse to the context in which that is said. So writing is more independent from the context. Speech is more dependent on the context. Spontaneity. Well, speech is by nature spontaneous. When you speak as a native speaker, you speak spontaneously with no pauses or hesitations. In your native language, you do not even think when you talk, or thinking and talking happen at the same time. So, spoken discourse is disorganized, spontaneous, ungrammatical even. Whereas writing, is not as spontaneous. You think a lot before you write. You do a lot of thinking. You even get back and correct yourself. You get back and organize your own writing. So you have plenty of time to get back and correct yourself. In spoken discourse, topics can also be changed. So you are expanding. You're expanding on a topic. You're expanding a topic. You're talking about an issue, and then one of the interlocutors in discourse shifts or switches to another topic. And this happens spontaneously. In writing, this is not so. If you want to make a shift from one topic to another topic, you use transitional markers. You use elements. In speech, you might do this by your intonation, gestures, body language. But in in writing, you usually use transition markers. Speaking is teeming with repetition, hesitation, redundancy. We use a lot of repetition. We hesitate. Right now you see that I have pauses, hesitations, even redundancy. Certain sounds I sometimes I use interjections. I use meaningless sounds like right? Because I want to budget my time. I want to buy time. I am thinking about what to say, how to say it. That is redundancy. Or sometimes we repeat things. Repetition is partly an example of redundancy. These characteristics do not exist in writing. Usually, they do not exist in writing. Corpus linguistics has shown that, in fact, the differences between writing and speaking, the differences are not absolute. But in fact, we are moving on a decline. On a decline of differences. Certain linguistic features are characteristic of both spoken and written language. But those features might be more available in written than in spoken language. So in fact, we are dealing with constructs that are complex. In fact, we are dealing with multidimensional constructs. Speech or writing are constructs with their own complexities, niceties, and delicacies. These niceties and delicacies of speech and writing are partly shared and partly different. Now, let's be more specific in terms of the borderline between discourse and pragmatics. Well, Queen Victoria, once said, "We are not amused." This was, in fact, a famous expression that was said by Queen Victoria addressing, her courtiers, right? "We're not amused." What does that mean? In fact, there are three types of meaning within this expression. "We are not amused." There is syntactic meaning, or meaning at syntactic level. And by meaning at syntactic level, we mean, the syntactic function of single expressions, like "we," which is plural, an NP subject; "are," which is the verb; "not," which is the negative marker; and "amused," which is the adjective complement. This is meaning at the syntactic level. At the semantic level, by "we" mean first person speaking, first person plural; "are," which is the stative verb, not an action verb; and "amused" is synonymous with "entertained." This is the second level of meaning that is communicated. There is also a third level of meaning that is communicated by this expression. "We are not amused." And that is the studying of language in relation to the contextual background, or contextual background features. You might not know very much under what circumstances Queen Victoria said that expression, "Be not amused." If that information about the context in which that expression she used is not available to you, then syntactic information and semantic information would not help very much in the way of working out all the meaning. In fact, contextual information is required to know what is meant by what Queen Victoria said. Well, you should know under what circumstances Queen Victoria said that expression. If you do not know, for instance, that at that time Queen Victoria was in a prolonged depression at the loss of her husband, Albert. So the prolonged depression was caused by Albert's death, and so her words were a response to a joke which the courtiers had made before her. In fact, those they called the courtiers to come to Queen Victoria and to crackle jokes so that they would help Queen Victoria they helped Queen Victoria out of that that dismal condition. right? And yes, they wanted to amuse her, but well, they crackled jokes, but after some time, Queen Victoria said, "We are not amused." So this expression, "we are not amused," means stop cracking jokes. You see that this interpretation is not available in semantic and in syntactic levels of information. It's only in the contextual background. It's part of the contextual background features. So if you do not know that at the time that those people were cracking jokes, in fact, Queen Victoria was in a prolonged depression at the demise of her husband, that she was suffering from her husband's loss, and so jokes could not in a way entertain her. Then you will not be able to work out what is meant by that. So pragmatics and discourse analysis have much in common. They both study context, text, and functions. In fact, both pragmatics and discourse analysis look at discourse, and they concentrate on stretches of language that is meaningful and unified for its users. Discourse analysis calls this unification of language or meaningful use of language as coherence. In pragmatics, we call it relevance. So in discourse analysis, we are dealing with cohesion and coherence. The corresponding areas in pragmatics are relevance and cooperative principle. So in discourse analysis, we study the stretches of language use in terms of coherence and cohesion. In pragmatics, we concentrate on these stretches of meaningful use of language in areas like cooperative principle and relevance. And finally, pragmatics and discourse analysis are concerned with functions. Remember that Queen Victoria's expression, "we are not amused," does not only mean that I am not happy at the way that you crack jokes. It does not report. I mean, this statement, "we are not amused," is not simply a report of I am not entertained by your jokes, but in fact it's also a command issued by her to the courtiers to stop crackling jokes and to respect me. Right? This is what we mean speech act in pragmatics, not in discourse analysis. In discourse analysis, this is studied under what we call critical discourse analysis. So where discourse analysis differs from pragmatics is its emphasis on the structure of text. Discourse analysis relates to language above the sentence level and how social transactions impose a framework on discourse. It traditionally covers topics of conversation analysis, exchange structure rules, or interactional sociolinguistics, text analysis, genre analysis, thematization. Pragmatics focuses on the importance of the social principles of discourse, Ricean maxims of conversation, cooperative principle, Leach's maxims of conversation, Leech. Take this example, which happens between AF and DM. You might read it on your own. This is an example that you find in the book on discourse analysis by cutting. An example of hill walking. Right? So you went to Aaron, a bit of a come down, isn't it? It was nice actually. Have you been to Aaron? No, I have not. Like to go. Did a lot of climbing. I went with Francisco and David. Ooh. Francisco's roommate, and Alice is a friend of Alice's from London. There were 6 of us. Yeah, we did a lot of hill walking. We go back home. Michelle and I go home. She looked at her knees. They were like this, swollen up like this, because we did this enormous 8-hour stretch. Ooh. Well, there are 3 sorts of context here in this example: situational context, background knowledge context, and contextual context. So situational context, background knowledge context, contextual context. Well, what is meant by situational context? By situational context, we mean the immediate physical context, or immediate physical co-presence, the situation where the interaction is taking place at the time, at the moment of speaking. For example, take these expressions in the penultimate term, where DM says they were like this. They were like this. Like what? Swollen up like this. Swollen up like this. Like what? You see, interpreting this expression, this, depends on the context, depends on the situation. DM, well, points to her knees and shows how her knees were swollen up, like this, like when you show it with your hands that it's swollen up, right? So the meaning of this depends on the situation in which this is said. This is what we call situational meaning or situational context. So by situational context, we mean the immediate physical context or immediate physical co-presence, or the situation where the interaction is taking place. Take this example. This happens in math class. "49? Why do you say 49? Because there is another one here. Right. We've got 49 there, haven't we? But here there's 2, okay? Now, what is it that we've got 2 of? Well, let me give you a clue. This here is 40, that's 4 tens, 4 tens are 40. Now, what is the situational context? Yes, here. But what is here? What do we mean by here? The classroom. Right? The classroom. And in fact, the teacher and the student are pointing to the board, to the whiteboard, where they are writing, right? We've got 49 there when they are pointing to, well, one side of the board, and then the lecturer says, here there is 2, again pointing to another part of the whiteboard that there is 2. Or where the lecturer says, this here is 40, this here, again here, well, the lecturer is pointing to, well, one side of the board. That's 4 tens. Right, so the expression here becomes meaningful only in classroom and when they are pointing to the board, pointing to some figures written on the board. This is what we mean by situational context. Then background knowledge context. Well, by background knowledge context, we mean cultural general knowledge and interpersonal knowledge. Cultural general knowledge and interpersonal knowledge. Now, what do we mean by cultural general knowledge? Well, before we turn to this example, let's get back to the hill walking example. Well, by cultural general knowledge, in this example, we mean AF and DM share cultural knowledge about low mountains, because DM says we did a lot of hill walking, right? So DM says we did a lot of hill walking and AF was not surprised, right? That AF was not surprised that DM did hill walking for 8 hours and and that her knees were swollen up. Right? So this is part of the cultural knowledge that they possess, that they share about, well, that place. Where is that place? That place, Aran. Aran in Spain. Yes, mountain climbing in Aran. So AF knows that, well, going to Aran and doing a lot of hill climbing requires a lot of strength, and it means, well, swollen knees, and so AF is not, in fact, surprised at the way that, well, DM's knees were swollen up and that it requires a lot of strength. Now take this example. Rock music was born twins. There were two sibling styles, one derived from country and western, one from rhythm and blues. These two sources were distinct and separate courses of the music industry. One white, stemming from Nashville, Tennessee and Wheeling, West Virginia, the other black, stemming from Chicago, Memphis, Houston, St. Louis and Kansas City. But of course there was an overlap between the two styles and their location, especially both had wide national followers. Well, the community that this paragraph is addressing would be people with an interest in North American pop music. You might not be interested in this music at all. Yes, it talks about the development of rock music, but before I read this, I did not know that rock music, well, in fact, rock music was comprised of two different styles, one representing black people, one representing the white people. I did not know about this. I did not know about, I don't know, blues and rhythm, so on and so forth. So you have to be part of that community. Right? If you wish to know about all these things, then you have to be part of that American that community, or you have to be interested at least in rock music and study about rock music, and because there are things I do not understand. I do not even know where these cities are on the American map. Well, I said that background knowledge context includes cultural general knowledge and interpersonal knowledge. Now take this example that represents interpersonal knowledge, and it happens between Jack and Jane. Why are you okay? Did you have friends in get a video last night? Oh, I had friends in, but we just watched a little TV. All right. All right. That was great. How do you feel? Okay. What does it say? Right, of having friends and watch TV. Yes. You see, there is some interpersonal knowledge that is not shared between us. It is only shared between Jack and Jane. And we are not part of that context. We do not understand very much of what is exchanged between Jack and Jane. For example, we do not know that, in fact, Jack uh, invited his friends to come and join him and watch TV. Why? Because, Jane was in a competition and, in fact, it was a very important competition, and Jane was on TV, and Jack and his friends were watching Jane win a gold medal. Right? So it's only at the end. It's only at the end of the conversation where Jack says, "That was great. How do you feel?" Right? That there is a flashback, and you might only indirectly realize that Jane won something. That in fact Jane won mm, won a gold medal in an Olympic event. So when he says, "I had friends in, but we just watched a little TV," it means I know that you won a gold medal. Let me just skip, as I will talk about these issues later in my next presentations. Two approaches to the study of discourse. One is the British view of discourse analysis, and one is the American view of discourse analysis. The British view of discourse analysis is called the exchange structure rule, and the second one is called conversation analysis, which is the American view of discourse analysis. The British view of discourse analysis, in fact, is a model imposed on conversation. The exchange structure, in fact, describes the interaction that is taking place between a teacher and pupils. It's the result of the work of people like belonging to Birmingham School of Discourse Analysis, like Sinclair and Coulthard. So take this example. The mound range is brown. Read it, please. The mound range is brown. How will you know the mound range is? T stands for teacher and P for pupil. They're brown. How can you spot the mound ranges? What's the clue for the key? The mound ranges are brown, only brown, purple. Why do you think some are purple? Because some are smaller than the others. And the purple ones are what? The student becomes inaudible. Are they going to be the taller mounds or the short mounds? Shorter. And finally, the teacher says the purple ones are the taller ones. The very tall ones, called the Alps, and they're purple. You've got to put them on this map now. Are you sure you know what to do here? I'll leave you to get on with it. Well, let's get back to this exchange. You see, well, the teacher starts the exchange. The mound range is brown. How will you know? Well, the teacher initiates the talk, and then he continues by asking a question. How will you know the mound ranges? Then the student says they're brown. Again, to the pupil's answer, the teacher again raises another question, then inviting the pupil to respond to this new question. Again, only brown, the teacher says. Well, drawing the pupil's attention to other colors. Then the pupil says purple. Right? And this continues until finally the teacher says the purple ones are the taller ones. They're very tall, so on and so forth. Notice that in this conversation, the teacher raises questions, the students answer, then the teacher reflects on the students' answers. So there seem to be three acts. The first act is the act of the teacher, initiating questions. The second act is the student act, answering the question. And the third act is the teacher's act again, reflecting on the students' answers. So teacher initiation, student answer, teacher reflection, initiation, response, and reflection or feedback. Feedback on the students' responses. This approach is called the IRF model. I stands for initiation, R stands for response by the student, and F stands for feedback by the teacher. So initiation by teacher, response by the student, feedback by the teacher. This feedback can be of two types, of course. Sometimes you reflect on the quality of the answer, of the response by the student. So you say whether the answer is right or wrong. And sometimes you continue the student's answer, which is follow-up. So initiation, response, feedback, or follow-up. This is called the IRF model, and well, the structure can be shown as such: initiation, response, initiation, response, initiation, response, and finally you might have feedback or follow-up. And that is another example. Again, the teacher initiates. And then I've got some things here to hands up. What's that? Saw. It's a saw. Yes, this is a saw. Saw. What do you do with this saw? Cut wood. Yes, you're shouting out there. What do you do with a saw? Marveletta. We cut wood. What do we do with a hacksaw? This hacksaw. Again, you see, teacher initiates and waiting for the students' response. Cut trees. Do we cut trees with this? No, no. Hands up. What do we do with this? Cleveland. Metal. We cut metal. Yes, we cut metal. And I've got this here. What's that, Trevor? An axe. It's an axe, yes. What do I cut with the axe? Wood. Wood. Right? Again, we have initiation followed by a student's response, and sometimes feedback or follow-up. Like this. What do we do with this, Cleveland? Metal. We cut metal. See? This is an example of follow-up. Yes, we cut metal. And I've got this here. Again, well, initiation. Raising question. What's that, Trevor? An axe. Response. It's an axe, yes. This is reflection on the student's response. What do I cut with the axe? Again, initiation. Well, from this perspective, each lesson is comprised of five levels. At the top, you have the lesson, which stands at the top. Each lesson is comprised of a number of transactions. Each transaction is comprised of a number of exchanges. Exchanges are comprised of moves, and moves are comprised of acts. Right, the IRF model, as I said, is used in not only in classroom, in describing classroom discourse, but it is also used in describing doctor-patient relationship, interviewer-interviewee, judge and convict, or in TV quiz shows. And this is an example of a TV quiz show. Which of these countries is not a member of the Commonwealth? Ghana, Malaysia, India, the Philippines. It's the Philippines. So again, the teacher initiates, followed by the student's response. Again, the teacher questions, the interviewer. The interviewer questions, sure. Then the participant says yes. Final answer, final answer. It's the right answer. You've got £800. Again, you have teacher initiation followed by the participant response. Again, initiation, response, initiation, response, and this is the right answer. This is feedback, and this is follow-up. Alright, let me stop by here. I will continue this topic next session. That's all for tonight.